Welcome to the Podkey summary of Create High-Quality Images using Image Playground from WWDC 2026. Apple's updated Image Playground setup is basically a big simplification story with a privacy angle running through all of it. The headline is that developers get a much cleaner API, users get stronger built-in privacy protections, and the app can flex from full image generation down to graceful fallback behavior, depending on the device and settings. There are also a few practical twists here, like usage limits tied to iCloud+, inline emoji-style image glyphs, and support for outside generators if a user has one configured. One of the more important details is where the image generation actually happens. Apple says this runs on private cloud compute, which is its privacy-preserving cloud setup, and the promise is that user data isn't stored or shared, even with Apple. That matters because this is off-device processing without the usual uneasy feeling of, well, where exactly is all this going? For developers, it also removes a whole category of work because they don't have to build server infrastructure for generation or invent their own data handling story around sensitive prompts and images. Apple is deprecating the older non-UI image creator API and replacing it with a single unified image playground API. The pitch is better image quality, including more photorealistic output, plus all the privacy handling rolled in. And instead of stitching together separate pieces for style, personalization, and back-end calls, everything now goes through one sheet-based flow. That's a pretty Apple move in the best sense. Fewer knobs, less setup, and a lot less opportunity to break things. In SwiftUI, the integration is almost suspiciously simple. You add a single view modifier, .image playground sheet, bind it to a Boolean, and that's basically the entry point. No API keys, no manual SDK startup, no extra initialization dance. The sheet itself handles the whole interface, prompt entry, style picker, people selector, and then it hands back a temporary file, URL for the generated image through a completion closure. Apple is also making it easier to see the experience with context from your app. Developers can create an image playground concept from plain text, from key phrases pulled out of longer text, from a source image, or even from a pencil kit, PK drawing. So if your app already knows the theme, the sketch, or the rough idea, you can hand that to the sheet as a starting suggestion. Important word there is suggestion, because users can still refine it or replace it, which keeps the feature useful without feeling boxed in. Developers also get pretty direct control over style. Image Playground Style lets you set a default style and an allowed list. So you can lock a card type to one look, like illustration, or offer a curated set that matches different formats, such as classic or expressive. Personalization is on by default, which means users can bring in faces from photos or describe appearances to make images feel more like theirs. But if you're building something like product mockups, where nobody needs their cousin's face on a toaster, you can switch personalization off and the people tools disappear from the sheet. There's also a neat little feature for apps that want generated imagery to live inside text instead of as a standalone picture. If the user picks the emoji style, the system can return an NS adaptive image glyph rather than a file URL. That means the result can be embedded inline like an emoji, which is handy for things like tiny identity markers next to usernames or compact decorative labels. Apple sends that back through a separate callback called on adaptive image glyph creation, so developers can handle rendering or storage differently from regular image output. Another interesting choice here is that Apple is leaving room for outside image generators. If a user has a third-party provider configured in settings, like ChatGPT, an external provider tab can show up right inside the style picker. The developers can include external, provider in the allowed styles, or even make it the default, and the system handles whether it's actually available. So the app doesn't have to do separate checks or build a parallel UI for that path. On the business side, there is a usage limit per user for Image Playground. That limit gets bumped up for most iCloud Plus plans, so Apple is clearly tying more generative capacity to its premium subscription layer. From the developer side, the system manages those limits automatically, which means no custom counters, no quota screens, and no extra logic to police usage. It's convenient for apps, even if it also quietly turns image generation into one more reason to stay inside Apple's paid ecosystem. And because availability can depend on the device, the language, the region, and the user's settings, Apple includes a supports image generation environment value. It only returns true when the full feature is actually available. That lets apps make a clean decision up front. Show the full image playground sheet when it works, or fall back to something like a photos picker when it doesn't. That kind of graceful degradation is boring in the healthiest possible way. Users just get the path that makes sense instead of hitting a dead end. Taken together, this feels less like Apple adding one flashy image feature and more like Apple trying to normalize image generation as a built-in app capability. It's tightly wrapped, heavily managed, and very opinionated, but it also looks genuinely easier to ship. And honestly, if the hardest part of the integration is flipping a Boolean and presenting a sheet, a lot more apps are going to try it. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.